I'm Bruce Shapiro. I'm the Executive Director of the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. I want to welcome you to a sort of double event. This is the 23rd Annual DART Awards for Excellence in Coverage of Trauma. And today is also World Press Freedom Day. So we've folded these two celebratory events together into a kind of longish double header of an evening. I'm going to talk more about each of those, and we'll be hearing first from some students, then from our DART Award winners in a few minutes. But first I want to turn the microphone over to my colleague Sheila Carnell, the Dean for Academic Affairs of Columbia Journalism School.
Thank you, Bruce. Those are my students who have to be in class at 6 o'clock today. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for being here tonight to help us celebrate, as Bruce said, two things. Press freedom, which is still alive in this country and in many countries around the world, and the DART Center. There are many things unique about the Columbia Journalism School, and one of them is we have housed in this building the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. It's very unique because no other journalism school, no other journalism institution has built-in research and training institution devoted to trauma and journalism. So we're very happy to do this every year and to celebrate the best in journalism on trauma each year with the DART Center, the DART Board, and the DART funders. There has never been a better time to talk about both the free press and about the importance of journalism and trauma than now. As you know, in many countries, even this one, the press is increasingly being demonized, being told that it's the enemy, that fake news and false news are the new curses of our society. This is a time when the free press is on the defensive, when truth-based, evidence-based, and fact-based journalism has never been more challenged, at least in this country, as it is now. So it is a time to celebrate, but also to think about our colleagues elsewhere in the world who are suffering, who are being arrested. There are about more than 250 journalists around the world in prison now, being killed and facing all sorts of stresses, including my own country, the Philippines, where we have they call him the Trump of Asia. We have an autocratic leader who also does not like the press, and where journalists are facing untold trauma from covering nearly every night killings after killings. So both press freedom and journalism and the dangers and the impact of reporting on journalists are very important issues to us here at the Journalism School. This is a good day to think of both, of our students and ourselves and our colleagues all around the world that have to face these issues. So congratulations to the DART Center. Congratulations to the winner of this year's DART Awards. And everyone, please join us in celebrating press freedom around the world. Thank you so much.
So, today is World Press Freedom Day. This is an international holiday that was proclaimed in 1993 by the United Nations General Assembly to celebrate press freedom, to defend media and media workers, and pay tribute to those news professionals who are killed for their work. At this point, I'd like to invite my three colleagues who are students of this school to come up and join while we talk a little bit about this. We've included, it's a pleasure to fold World Press Freedom Day into our annual DART Awards celebration for a couple of reasons. The first is general. Reporting on violence and its aftermath, reporting on conflict and tragedy, always means covering stories that someone doesn't want told, stories that someone wants suppressed, stories that vested interests want to keep hidden. That's what trauma is, whether it's about intimate partner violence and family violence and the secrets of sexual abuse within families or institutions, or the world stage of war and trauma. Reporters are fighting for press freedom when they do these stories. There's also a specific reason why this year I feel for the DART Center that we need to be mentioning this. A year ago, right after the DART Awards, I got on an airplane and ended up in Ukraine, in Kiev, at the invitation of a guy named Pavel Sheremet, that guy. Pavel, the editor of Ukrainska Pravda, muckraking daily in Kiev, had asked me to come on behalf of the DART Center and deliver a workshop on covering trauma, on covering veterans, on covering abuses of power, human rights abuses, and on self-care for his journalists, his young staff, who increasingly were being deployed to eastern Ukraine or who were dealing with the problems of the war that were coming home. I did that, and Pavel gave a kind of grand, enthusiastic welcome to this agenda at his newspaper, his news site. I went home, his reporters kept working. 6 weeks later, Pavel Sheremet was assassinated, blown up by a converted Russian mine, planted under his car in the middle of Kiev. It seemed, therefore, especially fitting this year when my colleague Ann Cooper, to whom much gratitude is owed for helping put this together, suggested World Press Freedom Day and the DART Awards go together in some way. So we are here to recommit to those values that Pavel, who embraced the trauma journalism agenda in Ukraine, committed himself to. We are here to recommit to press freedom, and we're here to celebrate the future of press freedom, which no one can really take away because it's something that we seize for ourselves as journalists with every act of honest reporting. We are fortunate here at Columbia Journalism School to have students from, Sheila, how many countries? More than 20 countries, who are our colleagues, our professional colleagues in journalism, and many of whom are from countries where press freedom is under constant attack and where it's a daily reckoning. So we're going to hear from 3 of those students here today. 3 people who are at a crucial point in their careers reckoning with the reality of press freedom where they come from and reckoning with the reality of press freedom in their own work. They'll introduce themselves, but they are in order to my right, your left. Alejandra Ibarra from Mexico, Amel Ghani from Pakistan, and Riham Alkousaa from Syria. I'm going to turn it over to the 3 of them, who will each just talk for a couple of minutes, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Alejandra Ibarra. Let me start by saying that during the first 4 months of this year, Mexico has already become the deadliest country for reporters, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. And according to the human rights organization, Article 19, 104 journalists have been killed in Mexico since 2000, and 23 are missing. Most of them covered crime, followed by corruption, politics, and the military. In Mexico, it is easy to kill a journalist. 86% of these crimes remain in complete impunity. When I worked as a volunteer keeping track of attacks on the press, I learned that in some municipalities in Mexico, drug cartels gather journalists for press conferences where they tell them which topics are off limits. I also learned about the hardships in Veracruz, a state where 22 journalists have been murdered and tortured, from the story of a reporter that was asking for a gun. He was not asking for a gun for protection, but to take his own life in case they came for him. I've interviewed journalists who have successfully reported and are still unharmed. One of them pretended to be a priest to be able to cover a state self-censored, and the other let public officials wrongly assume that her journalistic investigations were academic research. But for me, lack of freedom of the press in Mexico has meant that friends constantly ask me if I have a death wish for being a journalist. It meant that I had to sit down with my family when I was first admitted to the investigative track at Columbia to consider if I wanted to live a life looking over my shoulder. Freedom of the press means more than just being able to physically print an article. It means being able to walk down the street and report without having to think how you will explain yourself, who you are, or fearing for your life. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amel Ghani, and I'll begin by just giving out some facts about the state of journalism in Pakistan. So Pakistan ranks 139 out of 180 countries in the Press Freedom Index published by Reporters Without Borders this year. According to CPJ, 80 media personnel have been killed in the country on their jobs since 1992. 60 of them were specifically targeted for their work. These numbers, though, don't present the whole story. Journalists go missing, they have to flee the country overnight, or are killed. There are certain areas in the country that journalists are simply not allowed to cover, one of them being Balochistan, a province at the heart of the secession movement in the country, and the military's operation on terrorism. Journalists face a multitude of threats from the government, the military, and religious extremist organizations and terrorist organizations that function in the country. I'll give you a few examples of what happens to journalists when they do try to transgress certain lines and go over and challenge certain narratives. One of them was Salim Shahzad, whose body was found dumped in a canal in 2011. He had challenged the military's narrative on an attack on a naval base in the country. 2 months after his death, the New York Times ran a story saying that the Obama administration had reason to believe that the state's intelligence agencies had ordered his death. Just this year in January, 5 bloggers went missing throughout the country from different cities. They returned a month later, not speaking of who abducted them, but also speaking of torture. The Human Rights Watch once again pointed to the state's intelligence agencies, saying that they had abducted these people. This is in line with things that have happened to journalists in before the country, so it's not hard to believe. In April this year, Mashal Khan, who was a journalism student in Mardan, a city in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan, was lynched to death because he was critical of the state's blasphemy laws on his Facebook. How does one report an environment like this? Well, for me, the answer lies in continuing the work that these journalists have started. I will choose my words carefully. I will be careful about what I say and how I say it and when I say it. But I think one of the reasons I became an investigative journalist, one of the reasons I chose to study investigative journalism at Columbia, is because I do want to continue the work that these journalists have started, because I believe silencing yourself is also not the answer. Self-censorship is also not the answer. We need to continue speaking out, and we need to continue reporting as fairly as we can. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Riham, and I'm from Damascus, from Syria. When my friends Khalid and Ammar were killed last year, I thought this is a big news, and I had a story to pitch to my American editors. I said, let's do a story about them. And they said, people here don't want to read about other journalists. And so I never really wrote about freedom of press or those who were killed in Syria. Since the beginning of the war in Syria, 6 years, 211 journalists have been killed, and the number of those who are detained is not documented. Those who are either killed by Assad or killed by ISIS or other fighting troops, those who don't have the choice to leave, those who give us the news today. I come from Syria, and sadly today, when someone thinks about Syria, they think about ISIS. And when they think about ISIS, of course, they think of the fear of living under ISIS. Very few think about living under Assad, and even fewer think about the fear of living under Assad and Damascus, which is considered normal today for international journalists. The fear that I had since I had always this fear since I started working with the beginning of the war. I was too afraid to write about people complaining about electricity shortages because the government is cutting electricity of the people. I was afraid to report about the demonstrations people went asking for freedom in Damascus and other cities. I was afraid to contact any foreign journalists to tell them about what's happening in my country. I was afraid to write about the corruption the government was doing, just distributing UN food aid. I was for sure afraid to ask about those who are detained underground and tortured until death. So with all of this fear, I just decided to be a news editor, not to be under light. And yet, I was arrested, and until I left Syria, and this fear was why I left Syria. I thought that I will lose this fear once I leave Syria. It will be sitting next to the huge posters of Assad that is filling Damascus. But I was wrong. I'm still afraid. I'm still afraid every time I report about a story because my family is there. I'm still afraid every time I ask people about what Assad is doing to them. And I'm still afraid right now while I'm giving this speech. This fear, I'm not sure if it will go away. I doubt if it will be. But that's why we're here, to report without this fear, to just tell what's going on without thinking, will I lose my life today or tomorrow? Will my family mourn on me because I'm doing this story? Does it worth it? It's always worth it. Thank you.
Thanks to all three of you. I think the next generation of fighters for press freedom are here in front of us. Thank you, guys. You've reminded us that that press freedom is internal. It's not just a matter of law. It's what we find between us. And that journalism's a craft that demands courage, persistence, and joy. And you all have that. You also have reminded us of one of the reasons the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma exists. This was secretly, and I think my friend Chris Duggan from the Kenneth B. Dart Foundation doesn't know this, but I've always thought of this as a press freedom project. We're always trying in different ways to make it possible for journalists to exercise this craft and exercise the democratic responsibilities of a free press. So now we're going to transition from World Press Freedom Day in general to the DART Awards in particular. A few folks are leaving. Sheila and her students took time out from their class to be part of this conversation, but they actually have to go do their work, so they're going to go do it. We're going to go from celebrating press freedom to celebrating its fruits. The DART Award, which since 1994 has rewarded excellence, compassion, and innovation in reporting on the aftermath of violence, conflict, and tragedy. For 23 years, this unique prize, the only prize in the world devoted to recognizing journalists who take on these daunting stories, has been supported by the DART family. A commitment originally initiated in 1994 by W.A. Dart in Michigan, and now continued by his son, Kenneth B. Dart, of the Kenneth B. Dart Foundation in Cayman. It is my pleasure now to introduce my friend and colleague Chris Duggan, who's the vice president of DART Enterprises and the director of the Kenneth B. Dart Foundation, to say a few words on behalf of Kenneth B. Dart, and then we will move into handing out awards and then a roundtable conversation with the winners.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Good evening, everyone. Once again, it's my pleasure and privilege to be here up in New York at Columbia University to represent Ken Dart, the Kenneth B. Dart Foundation, all my colleagues at Dart Enterprises. It's for someone who's not in the industry, it's we're so used to picking up a newspaper every morning or logging onto the our local news network to get the day's news or to find out what's happening in the world. And it's not until I became a part of this program where I actually see what journalists go through on a day-to-day basis just to report the news. It's and the talks we just had from our colleagues from Mexico, Pakistan, and Syria kind of bring it home what the journalists go through. And every year, Bruce and his team here thank me and thank the Dart Group for all we do to support them. But as I say every year, and I'll continue to do it for as long as I'm involved in this, on behalf of Dart and the broader community that don't really appreciate and understand what journalists go through on a day-to-day basis, we want to thank all of you for what you do for journalism and what you do for getting the news out and reporting on stories in the world. So thank you very much. And I can certainly commit on behalf of Ken that our funding for the Dart Center will continue. I think Bruce, Kate, Kelly, and the entire Dart team do an absolutely fantastic job all year round. It's the only center of its kind in the world, and I know that their work touches all parts of the world. So on behalf of the Dart Group, thanks very much, Bruce, Kelly, Kate, the entire Dart team for all you do on reporting and helping reporters report on trauma. Thanks very much. And again, every year, sorry, I haven't quite finished. Every year, it's I'm astounded at the reports that and the pieces that are the Dart Award winners. And this year, the winning stories are absolutely fascinating. They're courageous, they're brave, they're interesting. And aside from just being a story, they're all stories that have actually promoted change. It's unfortunate what happened to promote or what instigated the stories, but I think the reporters have done an absolutely phenomenal job in telling their stories, getting the message out to the world, but also promoting change within their communities. So a huge congratulations to this year's Dart Award winners. I know I've met some of you, I haven't met all of you, but it's a pleasure to meet you all. And I know you're all, as you are every year, the Dart Award winners are very proud to receive the Dart Award, but I can assure you that all of us at the Dart family and the Dart Corporation are very proud to have our name attached to such outstanding reporters. So thank you all very much. Congratulations, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Chris, and especially for your very efficient shooing away of an MC who went in with the hook a little too quickly. You should be in show business. So, this is the 23rd annual Dart Award celebration. Began in 1994 as a newspaper-only award. It is now a cross-media award that rewards the combination of journalistic excellence, dignified and compassionate portrayal of survivors of conflict, trauma, tragedy, that educates the public about violence, trauma, and their aftermath. I have to say that this year, I say this every year, but every year gets more true. The competition was intense. We have some of the judges here, and they will all tell you that this year, out of well over 100 entries, there were 12 finalists that were all at such an extraordinary level of reporting and insight that it was a complex, long day of judging to get to where we are. I believe actually that a craft of trauma journalism has begun to emerge after 23 years of increasing journalistic attention to the aftermath of violence. The first award we're going to give out is the honorable mention. There are 2 Dart Awards and an honorable mention. The honorable mention this year goes to the New York Times for Lasting Scars. Sherry Fink, are you still here? This is by Sherry Fink, reporter, James Risen, reporter, Matt Apuzzo, reporter, Brian Denton, photographer, whose extraordinary work is here, Rebecca Corbett. This three-part series exposed the hidden legacy of torture perpetrated by the United States at CIA prisons and Guantanamo, and examined the long-term consequences on prisoners. It included searching moral inquiry, examined the ethical commitments of professionals and collaborators in torture, and through these stunning visuals, taught the world really something about the long aftermath of torture at Guantanamo Bay and black sites around the world. Judges called the series incredibly important journalism and commended it for providing a new angle on the urgent subject of torture. They also praised the series for giving voice to those deeply scarred by government policies and reporting on the actual humans harmed by those policies and refuting those who claimed there would be no harm. Sherry, please come up. While Sherry accepts her award from Chris, on behalf of the team, I also have to tell you that Sherry Fink is the first person in history to be a two-time DART Awards honoree. She was a DART Award winner several years ago for her remarkable series on medical ethics in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So, Sherry, congratulations. Do you want to say a word or two?
Thank you so much. I just want to say on behalf of our whole team that we're tremendously honored to be amongst this group and to be here today. And I personally really am so, I just feel that your mission at the DART Center is so, so important, particularly as we heard today, but always and all around the world. We set out to kind of try to answer a question. Our government had said that waterboarding, subjecting terrorism suspects to a lot of different techniques like that to try to get them to speak, that wasn't torture, in part because it would cause no lasting harm. But nobody had looked at whether or not that was true. So we set out with that question, our team, and went around the world trying to find as many of the people who'd been subjected to these techniques as we could. And as you may have guessed, there were a lot of long-term consequences. So we're hoping that that information helps to inform policy going forward. When President Trump was a candidate, he supported bringing back some of these techniques, and we hope that what we uncovered in terms of the lasting consequences might help to inform policy. So thank you for recognizing us.
Okay, and then we have two co-equal winners of the DART Award. The first team that will present, and I should say, by the way, that the DART Award since 1994 has always been a team prize. It's not just to a single writer. In part, this is because so much great journalism is simply collaborative, but it's also because it's our conviction, it's been the DART Center's conviction, that communicating the reality of traumatic events and their aftermath means overcoming a lot of social stigma, a lot of internal resistance at news organizations. It really requires an exceptional commitment on behalf of an entire news organization to commit to as difficult a subject as torture or sexual assault or the politics of incarceration, and to portray that in a way that is visually dignified, that is edited as well as it can be, and so on. So these are team prizes, and we recognize all members equally. The first team we'll recognize with the DART Award tonight is the Salt Lake Tribune, which received its DART Award for coverage on sexual assault at Brigham Young University and the stigmatization of students who were accused of violating the honor code when they reported sexual assault. Salt Lake Tribune received its award for this issue at Brigham Young, a private Mormon school owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This exhaustive and meticulously reported year-long inquiry into BYU's practice of investigating students who report sexual assaults for possible violations of the school's honor code led to sweeping policy changes at BYU and prompted wider soul-searching on rape culture in Utah. Judges called the Salt Lake Tribune's coverage a rare compassion of journalistic rigor, aggressive reporting, and compassion. They described the probing of BYU's religious teachings and use of the honor code as a punitive tool to undermine victims' efforts at justice as especially revealing and horrifying, leaving readers outraged at this paradoxical betrayal. Judges called the testimonies of victims in these stories remarkable for their candor and profound, and judges commended the Salt Lake Tribune for its courage in undertaking a tremendously difficult reporting effort that tackled obscene failures by one of the state's most powerful institutions. I should add that this team has also been recognized with the Pulitzer Prize, but they got the DART Award first. I'm going to read out the names of the team members. All but one are in attendance tonight, and you should all come up, all three of the four of you who are here. Erin Alberti, reporter. Rachel Piper, writer and digital news editor. Leah Hogston, photographer. And absent without leave, Sheila McCann, the managing editor. We will hear from the Salt Lake Tribune team, a couple members, during the roundtable, but if one of you wants to say a couple of words now, you certainly are invited to do so.
Well, thank you very much. We actually referred to the materials on the DART Center's website pretty frequently in our coverage of this, so this honor from a group that I've looked to for guidance is just, we're really grateful. And I want to acknowledge Sheila McCann, who isn't here, who was our editor throughout this process, as well as Jessica Miller and Matt Piper, Peggy Fletcher-Stack, and Nate Carlisle, who worked on reporting these stories too. The paper for supporting us all along the way, and the people who were in these stories just really went through a lot, and so I know that this validation is important to a lot of people back in Utah as well. So thank you very much.
Congratulations, guys. The next DART Award goes to a team from transom.org for the audio piece, A Life Sentence, Victims, Offenders, Justice, and My Mother. This intensely personal documentary tells the story of a violent crime committed against reporter Samantha Brown's mother, its far-reaching impact on her family, its decades of reverberations coming at a time of intense debate over crime policy, decades of reverberations on politics and the criminal justice system. Since this is an audio piece, we're going to give you a bit of a flavor of it here.
I suppose I could start this story with how the system failed, or with McFadden's family in Philadelphia. I could start with the thousands of prisoners whose hopes for a second chance were obliterated because of what McFadden did in 1994. Or I could tell you about the political careers, both launched and destroyed. But instead, I think I'll save those parts and start where I usually start, which is with my mother. And how are you feeling about today?
Well, I'm curious what you're going to ask me about.
Well, I thought today we would talk about September 21st. I have to say I'm feeling nervous about talking about it because I don't know that you and I have ever sat across from each other and had this conversation.
I guess for me, it's easier when I'm talking to strangers or when I'm just talking about how I survived. But when I tell a loved one, it's much deeper. It just goes deeper into what really happened to my spirit, my soul.
Are you okay to do this?
I'd like to try. I'd like to try.
I'd like to try too, but I worry about it being hard for you. You know, like I guess I worry that it will bring it to the surface in a way that maybe it hasn't been or doesn't have to be, or that might be hard for you.
No, I think we need to try this because we've decided to do it, and we're not quitters, are we? Let's try it.
Let's try it. Judges described a life sentence as deeply honest, brave, a personal story elevated to great journalism. They called Samantha Brown's interviews thorough, compassionate, never exploitative, and applauded her for bringing the listener inside the circle of affected people, allowing us to see how the emotional trauma has affected different people in different ways. They called the piece a truly remarkable feat worth every bit of the 2.5 years Brown spent working on it, and a gift to other survivors and their families, as well as to a society grappling with a flawed criminal justice system. They also commended Brown and producer Jay Allison for highlighting the unintended consequences of policy change. I will also editorialize now and say that as a journalism teacher, I can tell you that this is a piece that is destined to be taught in this school and others for a long time. If you have not heard it already, you must. It is one of the finest pieces of audio journalism I've heard in quite a few years. Team members, Samantha Brown, producer. Come on up, Samantha. And Jay Allison, editor. And while we are preparing for the photo op, I also would like to recognize Jeremy Brown, Samantha's mother, whose voice you heard on that tape, and who's here. Jeremy, would you stand up? Okay. One of you want to say something ahead of the panel? Sure. Knowing that you'll be able to say more.
My mother started talking about what happened to her the minute she landed in the hospital. She set an example for all of us, family, friends, and community, of what it meant to face what happened to her. To my mom, thank you for your courage and strength in surviving that night, and for your determination and grace in living every day since. To Jay Allison, thank you for accompanying me on this journey, for holding all of this with me, for helping me make sense of it, and for knowing when to give me deadlines and for when to give me chocolate. To Rob Rosenthal, my partner, thank you for loving me and for living with me through the telling of this story. And to the Dart Center, thank you for the important work you do. I'm deeply honored to receive this award and to be among the winners.
Yeah, I want to thank the DART Awards for carrying the flag the way you do, and your work is so important all around the world, and we're honored. I want to thank Samantha and also her mom for all the kinds of courage that they have shown, and it's been an honor to work with you and to keep working with you. I want to thank the radio stations that are willing to break schedule to put work like this in. It's a one-off hour. They're not going to fundraise off it. It's not going to benefit them in any other way than that it's a good story. And not every public radio station will do that, but to those that do, I thank them. I want to thank This American Life, which eventually broadcast this piece on their show, and for giving it a home. thank all our friends at Transom. Transom's just a little shop. It's really just us. I mean, it's not, we're in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and we do a lot of trauma reporting and other kinds of reporting, and it's just kind of on fumes, except for the people who support us, which are just the folks who use the website and who believe in this kind of journalism, and then one organization that supported us all along and supports so many important things around this country, and without which we'd be a lesser country, and that's the National Endowment for the Arts.
Now, could I ask, we're going to do a couple of things at the same time. First of all, we need to do a little more grip and grin photos. Could I have all the teams come back to take some pictures together with Chris? And Sherry, since you're still here, please. And actually, you know, Jeremy Brown, you're a collaborator in this. Why don't you join as well while we do some photos over there for about 5 minutes? We, at the same time, are then going to get reorganized to do the panel. And in the meantime, the rest of you, if you need some drinks or if there's still any food left over there, you should feel free to grab it, and we'll reconvene in 5 minutes for the roundtable discussion about this remarkable work.